Middle Tennessee is full of roadside plaques about Civil War battles, marking the places and people who fought there. Stories stamped in metal. In Dickson County, though, there's an historic spot like no other, where families still gather to this day. It's called Promised Land. And there's a plaque there too, but as you'll learn, it might need a bit of correction.
We have a state marker that says 1,000 acres or so were given to these newly freed people, but that's not so. People who moved into Promised Land actually purchased their land. It wasn't given to them.
Promised Land was established by formerly enslaved people after the Civil War. It's land they bought and worked, built upon and cherished. Families still keep their ancestors' memories and stories alive. And many of those stories have made it into a new book, From the Fiery Furnace to the Promised Land, by Serina K. Gilbert, who grew up there, and TSU historian Dr. Learotha Williams, who's been embraced, like many, as an honorary Promised Land cousin. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Thank you both for being here. Such an important story.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation to talk to you.
Dr. Williams, let's start with a short history lesson about Tennessee at the time of the founding of Promised Land. What was happening here? What had happened?
The war had ended and the South had been devastated by the war. But wasn't really anybody saying much about what the status of black people would be. So what did freedom look like? And it's an interesting story when you look at Promised Land because, you know, the founders of Promised Land kind of answered that question in terms of how they conceptualized freedom. Okay, they wanted land, and land was something that had been linked to independence or freedom forever.
Right.
So we knew they were going to do that. And then education, that became a very important theme for freed persons throughout America. So they looked to build some schools and churches. These churches in many ways become, as well as the schools, become monuments to their understanding of freedom. That is, now they can worship God as they saw fit. And oftentimes these churches and these schools were connected. But there was other people that had different understandings of what freedom was look like. And this materializes in Tennessee, I think, more concretely than in other places. Because down in Pulaski, you have a group that meet in a judge's office on Christmas Eve, and they form the KKK. And the KKK is a violent response to black emancipation, to black freedom. So we're going to try to keep these folks as close to slavery as possible. So we'll burn down their school. We'll terrorize the people that come here to try to educate them. So it's a miracle or divine providence or fate or whatever you want to call it that Promised Land even exists to this day, because there were so many small towns that did not, these freedom enclaves, if you will, that they rise and they fall, and you see their names today. And you typically, they're humongous houses there inhabited by wealthy folks.
Right. Serina, the very name of the place is a good indication that these people, your forebearers, were people of faith. Exactly.
It was the faith that really propelled and fueled their wishes. To them, it was like, this is what God promised. This is what we heard about in and are prepared for. And so they just set forth to live out what was promised. So we see them moving into what was considered a utopia. They may have not thought that, but basically here we can exercise the liberty of freedom. We can have our own families that we care for and take care of instead of being mandated to take care of someone else's family and let ours go. We can live in proximity, and people were able to share with each other, as we grow and develop. And so that is what it meant to them, they were able to walk out the fortitude of being free.
Yeah. How was the property procured? Was it bought, traded, and it wasn't exactly easy land to settle?
It was actually purchased. People who moved into Promised Land actually purchased their land. It wasn't given to them, as many people thought. We found the evidence of the deed records that showed that the land was purchased and they paid a larger price than the going rate. And this was land that was owned by people who lived there, who lived in Dickson County and had farms nearby. But there were some of them who received land grants. So they had excess land that they didn't even need and didn't use. So the area was very uncultivated and rugged. And so this is what they moved into, and they were able to cultivate the land where they could have houses. They had lumber and timber that they were able to build their houses with. And later on, it even provided an economic base for them, because many of them took jobs at the furnace where they worked as woodcutters. And so they were able to work near home, which was only 5 miles from the Cumberland Furnace, but that wood also provided the fuel that was needed to fire the furnace.
Yeah. Y'all's book is called From the Fiery Furnace to the Promised Land.
Promised Land. Right.
How close is the furnace linked to the lifestyle and the ability to make a living in those days?
It was closely related and connected to the community, because as I said, it was only 5 miles down the road, and you could walk through the woods, which made it even shorter. Many of the families were still connected in the furnace because they remained, their extended family remained in the furnace. So there's a very close tie. My ancestors on both sides came from the Cumberland Furnace. And so we had, growing up, I knew ancestors and family members, extended family, who lived in the furnace.
How did you guys meet, Lee?
And this is how I remember it. They had applied for some grant or some sort, and they needed a scholar or some scholars. And I'm not going to lie to you, I was real busy when I got that invitation, but I found out that they were TSU alumni, so I was kind of obligated after that. But the program occurred at that museum in Dickson.
We had a program
at the Railroad Museum?
The Plymouth Railroad Museum.
And this is where it get kind of weird. The program was on my birthday. and I thought about it later on, about how, you actually meet members of your family for the first time when you are born on that particular date. And so we headed off, and in my fervent desire, after talking to them, I was like, okay, I want to get out there. So I went out there for one of the festivals, and I just had a magnificent time. I'm eating catfish, I'm eating ribs, and listening to because Mr. Nick was playing out there. And I remember calling my brother and saying, man, I'm out in the middle of the woods listening to blues and I'm eating till I get happy. And he said, where you at? I was at a place called Promised Land. So that's how we connected. And then later on, we began a project where we interviewed some of the elders of Promised Land. And I brought a couple of my students out there with me. And it evolved into this. So what this book, and I started thinking, I was like, well, we probably started actually working on this book at that very first meet, and we weren't aware of this. So now I have several fictive kin out in the Promised Land, because you notice when I came in here and saw Miss Serina, I said, hey, Aunt Kay. So I got a whole bunch of new aunts and uncles and so forth, and that is something that's made this project really personal and worthwhile.
What a unique opportunity, too, to have a place that's still existing where there are so many vibrant stories that are still being told and retold. That doesn't happen in the history world much, does it?
And I might add this. They don't, well, maybe they've evolved a little bit, but history departments didn't train us to do this type of work. I mean, often it almost beat it out of you if they could. I mean, just repetitive, being objective, and you don't want to pay really close attention to these oral histories because they can be flawed. And I was like, man, I'm studying Reconstruction, and everything that I read that was published prior to 1930 was flawed and biased. So how come my folks' observations about the past don't hold as much weight as some scholar that had never been to Middle Tennessee? So when I got here, I was able to engage these impulses. I know a lot about Reconstruction, right? But let me see what a group of people here in Tennessee were doing. So when this Reconstruction story that I tell, and all of my students will attest to this, when we get to Reconstruction, I spent a lot of time on Promised Land. And I boast, and I'm not joking in many ways, I could probably teach a course on Reconstruction just by looking at Aunt Kay's ancestors and seeing what they did from freedom to the present day.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
Put us in a box. Go ahead. That just gives us something to break out of. Because the Next Generation 2025 GMC Terrain Elevation is raising the standard of what comes standard. As far as expectations go, why meet them when you can shatter them? What we choose to challenge, we challenge completely. We are professional grade. Visit gmc.com to learn more.
Go back. How far back? I mean, you grew up in this place.
Oh, yes. And I grew up with my great-grandmother was still living, whose father was born into slavery. My father's father was born into slavery. He wasn't emancipated until he was 11 years old. But their families went back even further. So I'm like a seventh generation from Promised Land, and that 7 generations from slavery.
You are a really good listener, or you have an extraordinary memory for stories.
I was actually a good listener, and I also had a knack for asking questions and talking with them. My aunt said to my mother once when I was little, she says, I didn't know Kay liked to talk so much. She said all day long she's been going, Aunt Mabel, tell me this, tell me that. Well, this was the budding social work profession that came out of me, that I wanted to know about people, and I wanted to, and I would ask questions that it would shock people because they're like, why is she interested in that instead of, wanting to make mud pies? But my family My mother was a storyteller. And I tell everybody, she was a griot, and she maintained the stories that went back much earlier than her. Her mother and father moved from when she was about 5 years old. They decided to move to Omaha, Nebraska. And she was vehemently opposed of doing that, and she refused to go. And her grandfather spoke up for her, and she said on that day he became her hero. And he said if the child doesn't want to go, she doesn't have to go. And she wanted to stay because her grandmother, my great-grandmother, was there. But also her grandmother on her father's side was still there, and she wanted to be around them. And so she listened to old folks and started telling their stories. And so I kept it in the archives of my mind. It wasn't until I moved back here in 2003 that I realized that this was a divine move, because that wasn't my plan. I had retired that year and already mapped out a plan, which would include doing volunteer services for the senior center. But no, I came here, and that gave me an opportunity to sit down with her on a daily basis, have tea and coffee, and listen to her tell me these stories over that she had told me before, when sometimes some of them were so painful, I didn't want to hear it. And I said, I can't hear that. I blocked it out that this didn't happen. But then when I started doing the research, and some of the newspaper articles supported what she had said, that was really surprising to me. But yeah, I guess and I'm still a good listener, and I want to hear and know.
This book is packed with interesting characters who are all real people who lived. Who are your favorites? If you have to choose one or two to talk about.
I believe my favorite was Uncle Boss, who was my mother's, he married into the family. Actually, the book also shows that he really didn't marry into the family. He was in the family. But Uncle Boss was a very colorful man who stood tall, and he was what they call a jackleg preacher. That means that he was not ordained, but he would preach the Bible, and he was a farmer. One of the things he would do is whenever my great-grandmother, who was she delivered babies.
Oh, like a
midwife. She was a midwife and an herbalist. And when she would deliver the babies in the community, my mother said she would trail along with her. Another reason why my mom wanted to stay, because she was learning. So whenever a baby was delivered, she would go with her grandmother to deliver the baby. Then she would run to Uncle Boss's house and let him know that the baby was born and tell him the gender of the baby. Uncle Boss would go to the church and ring the church bell, and he had a certain sound for when a baby was born in the community. So everybody knew who was pregnant in the community, and who was about to deliver. So they would say, well, I guess Tamar had her baby, or I guess Lizzie had a baby. And so they would know. And the same way was when someone was gravely ill, terminally ill, she would also go and tend them, and if they died, or she would be sitting with them, she would let Mom know, and Mother would go let the town crier know, who was Uncle Boss. So I'm so glad that now there's a road named after him in Promised Land, and it's called Redding Crossing. At that time, when I was growing up, they didn't call it a road, it was a lane. And he would walk that lane to the mailbox every day, and maybe twice a day he would go, and then he would bring the mail back to the people that lived along that lane, and he would sit down and talk with them and rear back in the chair. And I remember my grandmother always saying to him, "Don't break the legs off that chair," you know. But anyway, he was a person, one of my favorite people to talk about.
Lee, any character jump out to you?
And I don't know what she's related to you, but Farmidella.
Farmidella was my great-grandmother.
Her image is on the cover of the book. And when I saw that, I was like, is this a Promised Land resident? Or did she mistakenly send me a picture of a queen? Because she looked so dignified. But I think I don't have any favorites because all of the stories that the deeply personal stories that she shared really resonated with me because I would see somebody reference, I'm like, okay, that's like my Uncle Charles down in Florida. But the same sort of tendencies. But I for me, and I think this is the ultimate value of this book, is that you're getting a very deeply personal insight into how a family made the transition from enslaved to freed people, how they negotiated Jim Crow, how they celebrated and loved on each other, and sometimes how they fought and disagreed with each other. One of the coolest points in the book, I think, and Kay and I are going to have to pour up some whiskey and talk about this, was Gilbert Town. I was like, okay, how cool is it to have a town, a part of your community that's named after your family, and what went on in Gilbert Town? That's what I'm really curious about.
Well, what did go on in Gilbert Town?
Well, William Gilbert, who was the person who moved to that community and settled in the area that's called Gilbert Town, and it runs south of, it's north, running north of Promised Land, the Promised Land community. He settled there, and with his wife, they, when their children grew up, they moved and lived near them. And so by the time the children was grown, it's probably when Gilbert Town got its name, or when they were young teenagers. They were all musical, and they played instruments, they sang, and they danced. And that attracted other people in the community, and they would go there. And I remember my dad telling me about a man that I knew as a child who was much older, and said he would come down the road singing tee-tot, 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 and dancing because he knew what he was going to be in for when he got there.
What, for those that have not visited, I've been fortunate enough to visit, and it's amazing. What exists today, and what can people see that'll kind of send them back in time?
Well, one of the things, our mission of the Promised Land Heritage Association is to preserve the history and legacy of the community. And what stands today is the Promised Land School that was built around 1880, and it was the land that it's on was donated by a man who fought with the U.S. Colored Troop. His name was John Nesbitt. And John Nesbitt and his wife came out of slavery and set up a school in their home to make the children, men and women and children, but mostly it was for adults, to make them literate and be able to negotiate this new freedom. And so John was fought with the heavy artillery. He was responsible for fueling the cannons and cleaning them and maintaining them. And as a result, he ended up with injuries like soot and breathing in the air of the
like a
cannon.
Black lung or something?
Yeah, so he ended up with something like the black lung. He had respiratory problems, and I understand that he also had issues that would just cause him to faint, like syncope, where he would just pass out. And this all started after he came out of the service. His physician recommended that he apply for disability and compensation for his injuries with the Department of Army. And it took him 12 years before it was finally approved. But one of the letters in the affidavit that I found was from a former enslaved man whose name was Vanleer. His last name was Vanleer. He said that he grew up with John Nesbitt on a plantation where they did milling. He was a miller, and he did flour. He said that that wasn't a problem he had growing up. It didn't happen until after he came out of the service. And so with this person's and the physician's statement, the Department of Army then awarded him his disability. So with the monies that he received, he bought 125 acres. And on those acres, he allowed the community to build a church and a school. And so that was the Promised Land School, and it served as the Nesbitt School, a private school, until 1889. And then he gave it over to the county. He and his wife agreed to deed it to the county to become a public school, which served the community until 1957. And it was an African-American elementary school. And so, yes, I think that answered your question, right?
So you went to school there?
I went to school there until 5th grade.
1 room, 2 rooms? Describe it.
It was a 1-room school up until during the administration of Roosevelt, when he required, his act required that all schools serve hot lunches. And so a kitchen was built on. And so now it's a 2-room school building. But that school has been recreated as a museum.
Right.
And it has a lot of the period furniture that was already there, including this old piano. It's actually an upright baby grand, and it still has a very nice sound. And the desk of the teacher is there, and there are pews that were made by men in the community that serve as the desks for the students in the early days. And so instead of being able to write on a desk, when it came time to write, they would get down on their knees and use the seat part as a desk. So we have some of those pews that are still there, and we also have some of the what was called tubular desks that came along later in about the 1930s.
You obviously got a very good education. You went on to be a college graduate, advanced degree. Did a lot of people come out of there and go on to higher ed?
We had, education was very important, like Dr. Williams said earlier. The teacher that was there when I left, her name was Miss Ollie Hudson, and she was from Dickson County. She never referred to us as students. We were scholars. And that's what she expected out of us. And our high school was about 8 miles away. And so Promised Land happened to be a feeder school to the high school. The students that graduated from Promised Land usually went on to be the valedictorians and salutatorians of their classes and were more likely to go to college. And so growing up, that was the only expectation that I had in terms of what will I do when I finish high school? I'm going to college. And by the time I was in 8th grade, I decided what my career would be. At first, it was going to be a missionary, and I based it on meeting some missionaries who had traveled to Africa. They came to one of the churches that I attended in Nashville one Sunday with my pastor's wife. And so based on what they were telling me, that's what I thought I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to help people. And then a TV show when I was in high school called East Side, West Side with Cicely Tyson, and I can't remember who her co-character social worker was, but it was a male, a white male. So it was a black woman and a white male who worked with street gangs in Chicago. And I said, that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And before I finished high school, I knew that I wanted to live in an urban area. So, and I thought it was going to be working with street gangs. But I found that social work is a very broad field, and there were a number of other opportunities. And so I would say by the time I graduated, I knew I wanted to be a medical social worker. So yeah, the community prepared me, and when the African proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child, I definitely felt that in our community, that everybody, I was always concerned, whatever I did on the outside, I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't bring shame to anybody in the community, not just my parents, but I thought of other people as well.
Yeah. Dr. Williams, this is pretty meticulously documented at the end of the book. There are, well, for one thing, there are great photographs, but then there are also citations and other things. How deep did you have to go to ferret out the proof in these tales that were handed down? There was, of course, newspapers and county records and so forth. What kind of stuff did you get to look at?
It's like, and I don't want to sound too melodramatic, though everything that I'd done as a professor prepared me to work with them. Because my first job was in Savannah, Georgia, where I did a lot of research amongst the Gullah Geechee people, and I would look at their communities and how they tried to hold on to it. But oftentimes, the only stories about that community was within that community. And this speaks to what I was alluding to earlier about us historians in our discipline. We oftentimes overlook voices that can help us understand things. So when I got here, I just had to revisit, and wow, this is one of my PhD comps questions. The transitions of African Americans from enslaved to freed people. So I already had a blueprint. I say, okay, we're going to look at the churches, we're going to look at the schools, we're going to look at their advent into politics, and also how they resisted, some of the violence. So I had that in place, but I also had to understand that Reconstruction ended here in Tennessee very quickly. 1870, the state elected former leader of the Klan down in Giles County as the governor, John C. Brown. So I imagine the veterans from Promised Land being in a position where they're thinking, we fought for freedom. We laid our lives on the line, and this is what we get. So to make it precise, too, Tennessee was a little bit peculiar because Reconstruction ended here very early. So, of course, I wanted to delve into the USCT records. Then I took a deep dive into the Freedmen's Bureau records, which coincidentally had just been placed online. But it wasn't indexed, and it still ain't indexed.
Oh, fun.
So, but I kind of knew what I was looking for, so I paid close attention to, in some instances, the reports of the superintendents of education. And then I read these general reports about what was going on in Middle Tennessee. And what I found was Promised Land didn't face as much violence as other places, and it's still wrestling with why that was the case. I remember Dr. Fulani, Sokoto Fulani, telling me about the spirit of the folks in Promised Land and how he said they would work, but they would work for themselves. But then he also shared a story about election day rolls around, so they go to the polls in Cumberland Furnace to vote, and they're turned away. And he said that his ancestors came back home, got the firearms and then came down and shut down the polls. Basically, if we don't vote today, nobody votes.
Yeah.
You don't see that in a lot of places. So we're still, in many ways, trying to probe a little bit deeper to find out just the nature of the folks here. I was very much a scholar of Jim Crow before I got here. And one of the things that I was interested in is how the folks in Promised Land negotiated Jim Crow. Because, you could go into Charlotte, right, and face all of the humiliations. But what we often have to do, and this kind of intersects with the work I did in North Nashville, too, you have to create an enclave where you are insulated from Jim Crow, where you can shop and be respected, or just do something simple as try on clothes or use the bathroom. This space made me think about all of the research that I had done in terms of just finding Black voices. But also, I realized that Jim Crow was a tough time. So what did our people do in particular to deal with this madness? And so hence why I'm really intrigued by Gilbert Town and other things, even the church services. But there's one thing I did that was almost by accident, if you believe in accidents, because we have so many things that, 2 quick stories, I promise. I was working on a project called Slave Grandchildren Remember, where I was interviewing elders who actually knew their enslaved ancestors, who actually spoke to them. And I was at a assisted living facility in Bordeaux. And then I was talking to this one gentleman from Franklin. He's getting up in age. And I don't even know how we got on this topic, but he's like, you ever hear about this community called Promised Land? I was like, I just met somebody from Promised Land. So yeah, I kind of do. So that made me think about how, the reach that Promised Land had. But also, I was working on something else, and it was late. I'm king of the third shift social media for all of y'all that follow me. And for some reason, I was like, let me see something about Cumberland Furnace. So I looked up Cumberland Furnace and I saw Promised Land. And then I was like, wow, so I know the name of this church, and these names are ringing out to me. So I saved it and I sent it to Aunt Kay. And she called me back. She was very excited. She's like, I'm related to just about every one of these people on this list. So in terms of the research, and this is why this whole project is important, I think. Because a newspaper article is a typical primary source, right? And the stuff that I read about Tennessee during Reconstruction, those are secondary sources. But those stories she tells in this book, and the ones that I listened to her ancestors tell, animate this history in a way that I cannot do in the class. I'll talk about Reconstruction. I'll talk about Black folks being free. I'll talk about the confusion on how the state and this country define that freedom. But I can put on one of those oral interviews, and it adds a dimension to the story that I can't replicate in the classroom. That's why I think this type of work, particularly in the time that we're living in now, so critically important, because none of us are getting older, right? So this is a story that came out at the right time.
It's Banner and Company, and my guests are Serina K. Gilbert and Dr. Learotha Williams, authors of a new book about Promised Land. We'll be right back. There aren't many places left like Promised Land, and every June the generations still gather to honor those who came before. A few years back, the Banner's managing editor, Andrea Tudhope, had a chance to visit what is essentially a big family reunion, the Promised Land Festival. We thought you might enjoy hearing some of the voices that are still telling its story.
It's a beautiful, sunny Saturday morning in Promised Land. There's a small crowd gathered under a tent. The annual hat parade is about to begin. Descendant Helen Edmondson Hughes started this tradition years back. She is famous in this town for her hats.
You never saw her without a hat. She wore a hat everywhere.
That's her older sister, Bernice Edmondson Hurd. Helen passed away last year, so today Bernice is wearing one of Helen's hats. It's lime green, wrapped in red hearts. The parade kicks off and Bernice leads the way. In line behind her are women in bright sun hats, pinks and yellows, some wrapped in scarves.
Come on, y'all, clap your hands for them. Look at the parade of hats.
Toka Nesbitt Rainey is in the parade. She's a descendant of founder and U.S. Colored Troops veteran John Nesbitt. It's been 29 years since she last stepped foot here in Promised Land.
You can see the reinvestment into the community where now former descendants are coming back home, and that's what this weekend means to me. It is just so, I'm just full.
Today's Promised Land isn't quite what it used to be. But to this day, one of the town's churches and the original Promised Land school are still intact.
Seeing the original piano and seeing the original sewing machine and seeing the benches and the actual desks where they sat, you can feel the history.
Hanging on each gust of this cool early summer breeze is a memory. The air seems to be bursting with them. Toka's right. You can feel it.
Almost can hear the bell ringing. We out here playing and hear the teacher standing in the door. When the bell rang, we had to line up, and then we would line up according to our ages and our size.
Nancy Nesbitt Winfield was born and raised here. In its heyday, Promised Land was a self-sustained, thriving community. All within 1,000 acres or so, there was a school, 3 churches, and a few general stores, selling everything from flour and sugar to coal oil and chicken feed.
We had gardens. We raised our own food. We had fruit orchards and all of that. Our favorite nuts was hickory nuts. We had hickory nut trees over there.
Of course, this was their land. They grew the food they ate. They raised their own livestock and tended to their own tobacco farms.
I remember after school, we had to work. We had chores. We had to get home. We had to get the chips and the wood in the house because we had wood burning stoves. We had to feed the animals. We had pigs. We had cows. We had a pig named Rocky, and she was our pet pig, just like a dog. Rocky was in the house with us.
At its peak, there were around 50 houses in Promised Land. The founders built a one-room schoolhouse where they taught 1st through 8th grade. By 1905, there were nearly 100 kids in attendance. School let out around 3 back then. After congregating around the mailboxes on the main road, the kids roamed free.
We played hide and go seek, honey, honey, bee ball. We played that. Honey, honey, bee ball, I can't see ya. Honey, honey, bee ball, I can't.
In the summer, if I was here, we could be up and down this road. I don't know how my mother kept up with us.
That's descendant Sylvia Edmondson Holt. The Edmondsons lived down the way from the Nesbitts, right on Promised Land Road. One of the churches in town sat right across the street from their house. So, of course, they went every Sunday. All the kids in a line and Dad at the back. Well, almost.
And guess who was behind Daddy? Old Skippy. That was our pet. Skippy came all the way to the church door. My dad saved a biscuit from breakfast. So he would take that biscuit, because the road was not paved, so there was dust. So as we crossed that road and got dust on our little patent leather shoes, Daddy had a biscuit in his pocket. He would shine everybody's shoe with that old biscuit, and then he would hand it to Skippy.
Her dad was Theodore Edmondson. He started the Promised Land Singers. They were famous for a yearly recording session that came to be known as all-night singing, because even after the radio crew stopped recording, they'd sing and sing all night long.
I remember vividly him singing here on the porch with his guitar, and we'd be sitting out here in the yard, so we were the audience, and he was on stage almost every night for the children.
The town was brimming with life. It was on these porches where this history was carried, told, and retold. Sylvia's cousin, Serina Gilbert, walked that dirt road, porch to porch, collecting those stories.
I can remember very vividly seeing streams of smoke coming up out of the chimneys and seeing laundry hanging on clotheslines, blowing in the wind, and smelling the food that was cooking. I remember the older people who were at home and not working would be on the porches.
B. Edmondson was one.
We called him Cousin Bubba.
Okay, I need to jump in here to say Cousin Bubba may very well have been Serina's cousin. In Promised Land, everyone is a cousin.
Probably are. Most people in Promised Land are cousins.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, they really are.
Hi, Sanchez. I'm your cousin Kay.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
I'm Sarah Lightfoot.
And we were trying to figure out, we've been friends for over 50 years. And she said, we may be cousins.
My mother was the aunt of your mother?
Your mother, I'm sorry, was the sister of your grandmother.
So we're cousins. At least that's what we've always called each other.
They all descended from those tight-knit families who first settled here in the late 1800s. Nancy of the Nesbitt family told me those roots are strong.
And if you're from Promised Land, you know, that connection, you just always want to come back, and it's just your family. It's like one big family.
Okay, so back to Serina's cousin Bubba.
He would share things about his life when he was a child, and I enjoyed hearing those stories. And in fact, those stories still live with me now.
By the 1950s, the town had dwindled. A lot of families migrated north, most to Ohio. Serina was 12 and one of the last students left when the Promised Land School had to close down for good in 1957. But that school was her foundation. There were 5 shelves in the library in the back corner of that one-room schoolhouse. She still remembers those books.
There was a book called Near and Faraway Places. I enjoyed those books because it took me away from Promised Land to far places.
Her education and career did take her to some of those faraway places. But her mom, Essie Vanleer Gilbert, never left Promised Land. When Serina returned in 2004, Essie was one of maybe 2 original descendants left. It was a ghost town, and Essie was on a mission to bring it back.
She herself was a historian and a griot who loved to share the history. And so it was contagious having her live under my roof and telling me and sharing the oral history with me, you know. I caught the bug.
If only Miss Essie could see it today. Since her return, Serina picked up her mom's torch and has ushered in a new era for Promised Land.
Promised Land is like in every fabric of my being. I feel like a daughter to the community. So when I talk about my ancestors, I feel very close to them. And I feel like I'm speaking as a child would about their parents. I feel that type of kinship.
In the past few decades, the Heritage Association picked up steam, the road's been paved, and the schoolhouse restored. And now families are actually moving in. Houses are being built on land still owned by the descendants of those original settlers. It's a diverse town now, but it's still Black-owned land. And that's something.
It feels good. It feels like life is continuing.
Under the afternoon sun, there's a duo performing, the Danberries. They grew up right here in Promised Land.
Sometimes you gotta just get back home. Right there where you started from.
Most of the descendants don't live here anymore, but those roots may be stronger than they've been yet.
Although we moved away when I was young, we never forgot it. We came back every year for homecoming, and we talked about it all the time. So Promised Land has always been a, word in our house. When I put my feet down here, I know this is my roots. This was Nesbitt land right here where I'm sitting. And my great-grandfather donated this land to this community. From the beginning, Promised Land, it grew out of hardship. People in Promised Land, put their feet and their hands to the grind and didn't look back. And I want them to remember. That's why we work so hard now to preserve the school and to preserve the heritage, because, we want it to be, even when we're gone, we want Promised Land to still be there. We want our children, our children's children to know about Promised Land.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode was produced by Steve Haruch and edited by me. The special dispatch from Andrea Tudhope is courtesy of WPLN. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or at NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company.